Hello and welcome to the Methodist podcast, published on the 9th of July 2020. This week we talk about mission and the practicalities of reopening churches. We hear how lockdown has continued for the people of Leicester. We talk about buying a new church and hear how services via conference call are bringing worshippers together. Most churches in England can now reopen if they wish, but should churches be doing more than just following the government guidelines? Emma Nash is the Mission and Community Engagement Officer for the Methodist Church, and she joins me on the line now. Hello, Emma.
Hello.
Emma, how should mission be at the forefront of that decision to reopen our churches?
Well, our task in this moment is to consider what use of our buildings and what pattern of worship will best serve the discipleship of our people and the needs of the community. We need to be asking, does God require that we reopen our building right now in order for us to be faithful to our mission? We need to be considering the simple question of whether we reopen our buildings for worship or not in the wider context of what God is asking us to do as Methodist people where we are. And I think the Methodist way of life gives us a really helpful framework for thinking about this. So, for example, on the Methodist way of life commitment card, under worship, it says, as far as we are able, with God's help, we will worship with others regularly. Well, we know that we don't need physically to be in the same building to worship together. We can watch a live stream or we can use a service sheet at the same time that others are praying and worshipping. And likewise, under evangelism and under service, the Methodist way of life card says we will share our faith with others. We will help people in our communities and beyond. Well, we don't need our buildings open to share our faith with others. We might need them open to help people in our communities. Let's say a church has discerned that there's a social need and they'll need their building back in action in some way to supply that need. Well, that church might want to think about reopening, but particularly with that in mind.
The pandemic is clearly a horrible thing, but has this pause in our lives and in the life of the church, has that given us an opportunity maybe to reconsider what mission might look like?
Absolutely. I think God's giving us a rare opportunity to start afresh. I think we all know how difficult it can be for churches to stop doing something when it's been going on for years, even if we know it's not really working. Now we can make active decisions about what we will restart. We can prioritise the things that serve our people's discipleship. We can prioritise the things that serve our communities. And churches that don't yet have a mission plan can take the opportunity to write one, to get together, admittedly via Zoom, via telephone, maybe putting questionnaires through letterboxes. But they can get together, consult together and write a mission plan to help them figure out what God is asking of them in this moment.
Some of those churches that have moved their services online, they've seen significant growth in the digital world, haven't they? How should churches think about moving those people forward in their faith?
Well, interesting question. I mean, first, I'd want to applaud digital growth as much as physical growth. Hearts and minds turned towards God and turned outwards to God's world. That's great. Some people who've been engaging with this digitally might not make the transition to our physical services yet, or they might never make that transition. And I think that's okay. So we'll want to consider what digital presence is fruitful and sustainable for us in the medium to long term. That will mean that those folks who've been engaging with us digitally, but perhaps aren't ready to go to a physical church building, they can continue to engage with God through our digital worship. And of course, people who are shielding or who are physically frail can continue to worship God together in that way. But in terms of taking people from digital engagement to attending a physical service or other events, I think it's about welcome and it's about communication. Making people feel welcome when they join us online, welcoming them by name, letting them know that we're glad that they're with us, trying to avoid insider speak, trying to avoid using language that only church people or only Methodists will understand. And then also, when we start to meet physically, making sure people know what we're doing and when, making sure they know what safety precautions we're going to be taking. And then I think also we'll need to think about where people might be at spiritually. So let's say we've been doing something really creative and really informal in terms of digital worship. If our normal Sunday morning worship in our building is quite traditional, well, that might not be the best fit for people who've been engaging digitally. So we might need to think about an alternative for them.
And you have some resources to help churches with their mission plans after lockdown, don't you?
Well, we've actually been working on some substantial mission planning resources in the E&G team, and they're going to be available from the 1st of August as a free download on the Methodist Church website. It's just called Mission Planning Workbook. It's going to be something that churches and circuits can download, can print themselves, and it takes them through mission planning in a kind of 8-step process. Not a fixed way, like having to do things a certain way, but just like a general framework for if you're writing a mission plan for the first time, these are the steps that we think it would be helpful for you to follow. So 1st of August, that comes out. Do have a look at it, do download it, and if you've got any questions about it, people are welcome to contact me. I'm the officer in the connectional team with particular responsibility for mission planning, and I'll be delighted to help in any way I can.
City Road Methodist Church in Birmingham is one of the few Methodist churches to have reopened its doors since the government relaxed restrictions. The church has reopened itself for private prayer, and joining me on the line now is David Hallam, local preacher and a property steward at City Road. Hello, David.
Hello.
What was the process you went through to decide that reopening was safe and the right thing to do?
We did a risk assessment, and I think a lot of people, talking to people in other churches, are really frightened about the risk assessment. It's just a form you fill in. You know your building really well. You know where people are likely to find it difficult to social distance. You just use your common sense. You go through the risk assessment. It's a very useful checklist, and you work out an action plan and you implement it.
Every church is very different, though, isn't it, David? And nobody's saying that the churches have to reopen if they're not feeling comfortable.
Well, that's it. And there are people who are self-isolating and should be self-isolating themselves. They've got health issues and so on. And nobody's saying that they should be pressured to come into church. And we should be very careful and very clear about that. And obviously, we should have in place procedures to support them anyway. But getting the church open, it's a coalition of the willing. Those who want to open the church will make sure the church is open. I don't think we should have a situation where people who can't come or don't want to come should be telling those who want to come whether the church should open. So it's not a question of getting a consensus of everybody in the church. What you need is that small group who are determined to serve God by opening the church and making sure that the doors are open and that it's a place of Christian worship.
Once you've completed the risk assessment, what are the practicalities of reopening the church to the public?
You go down to your local do-it-yourself shop and you buy some tape and you mark the social distancing on the floor. Perhaps you get a piece of chalk to mark a one-way system. You lay out the chairs in such a way. We can take 150 people in our church. We found that we can only accommodate 24 people at a time. I dare I admit that we've been practicing social distancing at our church for a long time. But if we were suddenly to get 48 people, we would just simply stagger people coming in. We can have a one-way system very easily, and we'd say, well, half hour for the first 24 and then half hour for the next 24. If we really want to worship, there's ways we can worship.
And have people come in? What's the response from the public been like?
That's been one of the interesting things. Yes, we've had about 5 people come in and pray. But what was interesting was I was on the door this week, and we had people coming past and they saw the doors open. They said, "Oh, is the church open?" And we said, "Yes, it's open for private prayer." And we had people who we'd never seen before come in and just sit for a few minutes in the presence of God, praying, which was really very encouraging.
Lockdown has been lifted for most of England and restrictions eased. Leicester, though, has had its lockdown extended after a spike in cases in the city. Reverend Yvette Headley is the Superintendent Minister from Leicester West Circuit, and she joins me now. Navette, what's the mood like in Leicester at the moment? Given that the rest of England is now enjoying greater freedoms, I'd imagine people in Leicester must be a bit disappointed to be left behind.
I think in the wider community, probably a little bit disappointed, a little bit deflated about not being able to do as much as they were hoping to do. On the news, there have been a few people who were quite almost angry, really. They'd got their shops ready, opened, sanitized, the distancing all put in place. So those people were quite upset. But yet, I think everybody is accepting that we need to keep one another safe. I've heard people talk about feeling as though they are being left out, and using terms as if they were somehow contagious and the rest of the community of the country isn't contagious.
And this must have been particularly hard for some of your older members who've had to remain in isolation for a further 2 weeks.
For some of them, yes. For some of them, I think were hoping they could spend some time with grandchildren, perhaps. Obviously, there's always this thing about having their hair cut. They've got appointments to get their hair done, and so some of that's being put back. But yes, being able to get out into the fresh air a little bit more, people were looking forward to. So there is some disappointment. Church members are making sure that they're looking after each other. So a lot of church members are checking up with one another in terms of hospital appointments, picking up medication, doing the shopping for one another. So everyone is being taken care of. Whoever I call to find out how they're doing, they either got family members or members from church, and it's just amazing. I've really been impressed by the way that the church members have looked after each other. So nobody finds themselves in need.
Moving is never stress-free, and Phil Worry is the Superintendent Minister of the Methodist Church in Herefordshire South and East Circuit, and he's currently in the process of moving Ledbury Methodist Church into a new building, as Phil explains.
We had a large Victorian building on the Hom End in Ledbury, and it doubled as a sort of a sauna, really, because it was so damp. Often we'd find 5 to 10 millimeters of water on the vestry floor. It was built in the Victorian times when you needed to build something impressive and something big. And it indeed was a beautiful building on the outside with a huge circular window at the top, quite an imposing building. But it was not really suited for the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. A huge space, but a huge vertical space, and not a huge amount of room in the sanctuary. A tiered balcony, which was very difficult to use. The fire escapes for the tiered balcony weren't very good. And the challenges for the congregation were that it was just acting like a millstone around their necks, because they were pouring money in to try and resolve the problems. And yet, the things they wanted to do, like lunch club and things like that, they couldn't do because the kitchen was tiny, and we could only manage to feed about 24 people from the kitchen.
And what's the building you're moving into like? What's the history of that building?
So it originally was a string factory. And you think, well, why would Ledbury have a string factory? And of course, in this part of rural Herefordshire, there's a lot of hops grown. So if you're growing hops, you need the strings for the hops to grow up. And that's we're just beginning to start to research what the building was. And took us a long time to buy it, but we are in now. We've put the signage up, and now we're starting on the process of converting the building to be our church.
And it's important that you move your members emotionally with you as well as physically, isn't it?
Yes, and we did have obviously had a few skeptics who didn't want to let go of the old building, so we worked very, very hard with everybody in the congregation. And what we wanted to do was to have a fitting end. So we had a very very good final. Well, I think it wasn't just a final weekend. I think it was a whole week of celebrations in the old building, and we invited people to come back who'd had a link with the building in the past. And it was amazing how many people from around the area, and people came from afar. People brought us their marriage certificates to show us that they'd been married in the old building, and that helped that we celebrated the old building. And I think one of the other big things that helped, we had a huge ending service. We had the local community choir came, the mayor came. And what helped was when we said to folks, look, your memories of this building will live on. The building's not being demolished. Your memories of the building will live on. And you can grasp those memories and take them with you to our new place. And I think that was one of the things that helped. We're going into something new, telling the story of the congregation in Ledbury having moved around in the past as their fortunes changed. I think helped. One of our congregation had written a hymn, and I'll just read you the last verse of his hymn. Lift up our minds to a bright new horizon, dim though it seems to our slow blinkered eyes. We are your servants, strengthen and lead us. Yours is the glory and yours is the prize. So this was written by Brian Hudson, one of our members.
And what would your advice be to other churches who find themselves facing a decaying and difficult to modernise building?
I mean, if you really can't convert it, have a good chat with the property development team, have a good chat with the New Places for New People team. And if you can't convert your place, I would sell it and buy something new, adapt another building, build a new building. I think we've got to bite the bullet, when we got a building that's not suitable, and it's especially when it becomes a millstone around your neck, and the congregation can't dream about mission because all they can do is worry about the building. And we need to be dreaming about mission. We need to be doing mission. We need to be trying all sorts of new and varied ways of getting people into our premises and meeting new people. Because it's only when we meet new people can we tell them about the love of God, can we show them the love of God. And that's what we're hoping to do through this building. And one of the other interesting things is that, we're not open yet. And every time I go down there, I'm meeting people outside who say, "Oh, hello, what's going on here?" And there's a level of interest in a new building. And our forebears must have discovered this. I mean, our forebears in Ledbury moved around the town before they built this Victorian building. They moved around the town quite a lot, and they must have discovered that.
Many people don't have access to the internet, so Barbara Sigley, Church Council Secretary at Great Worley Methodist Church near Walsall, decided to use the good old-fashioned landline and a conference call to bring everybody together for their weekly service.
What it was, only 7 out of the whole of our congregation have got access to the internet. And one afternoon, the pastoral secretary came to visit me, stood on the middle of my front lawn about 10 yards away from me, and said, "It's a really shame that most of them have only got landlines." And it just sort of, I thought, conference call. And that's what we set up. And it's a free phone call. It's an 0300 phone call. So it doesn't cost anything as long as you're not on longer than an hour. And it's brilliant.
So how does the conference call operate, Barbara? Because you actually try and manage it a bit like you would a visit to a church, really, isn't it?
we start off with asking people, as they come in, people announce themselves as they arrive. I've set up as you dial the number, it says, welcome to worship at Wesley. Then it asks you to put your room number, then a PIN number, and then it says, please state your name. So as you come into the church, hark at me, you know what I mean? As you come into the conference call, you're announced, so we know who's there. And then I open it by asking if there's any, I tell them who we've got on the prayer list already, and are there any additions? And then we then have our organist from his music room at home, and his wife holds the handset somewhere close to the speakers, so we can all hear it. That you can always hear everybody else, and we're in sync. I think if people were using mobiles, I think because mobiles tend to bounce somewhere else, I think that we wouldn't have been in sync, but we were, and it was really lovely there is something special about us. We sing our theology, don't we?
And Barbara, how have people reacted to the conference call church service?
Oh, people have been incredible. After the first one, 22 people came to the first one, and I had five emails from the people who could. I had phone calls all the way through. I had a text message, 2 text messages, and someone from another little church not far away asked if she could join, so she came this week. But no, the feedback has been terrific because they can sing. You know what Methodists are like if they can't sing, goodness me. So we had blessed assurance, Jesus is mine, and great is thy faithfulness as to start us off.
Now I hear that you did give some consideration to extending the conference call to other parts of church life, didn't you? We still have. We have a luncheon club on a Wednesday, and we have a knit and natter group on a Thursday. And I did say that they could do this conference call, but I think you'd look a bit foolish trying to eat your lunch with a phone stuck to your ear hole. But it was just a thought. This week's prayer is shared with us by Carolyn Lawrence, the Vice President of the Methodist Conference.
Lord God, your word says, forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up, do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the desert and streams in the wasteland. Thank you, Lord, for the ways we have seen and experienced your streams of living water through these dry and difficult days. Thank you that we can look to the future with hope as you do a new thing amongst us. Help us to have the discernment to hear your voice and the courage to follow in obedience wherever you may call us to go, even if it's out of our comfort zone. Amen.
Thank you for listening to this week's Methodist podcast. If you have any suggestions of stories that you'd like us to cover, do let us know. From myself, Mike Ivat, goodbye.